Well, hello. I'm James Bunyan, broker owner of Millennium III Realty. We're coming to you today to discuss something that's been in the news and everyone has an opinion on. Recently, everyone heard about the settlement with the National Association of Realtors and how it affects the commission being charged. There's a lot of technical issue with that. It's a proposed settlement that's going to prevent the industry from charging a standard commission. With that being said, our focus today is how does it affect the home buyer? Everyone's discussing on the discussion is based on, oh, now the price is going to come down. Listing agent can't charge a certain amount, but how does it affect the buyer when you need that guidance from not only the lender but also a realtor that you're working with? We're joined today with Marc Williams with PRMG Residential Mortgages, and he's a senior loan officer who have over 20 years of experience in this field. So, want to introduce yourself, Marc?
Hi, James. So thank you for having me here. So I'm Marc Williams. I'm a licensed loan officer, and I happen to be also a licensed real estate agent. I don't practice a lot of the real estate agent side because I chose to give my focus towards helping first-time home buyers and providing them with great information, getting educated with how to become a homeowner, and definitely providing the financing for them. So as you mentioned, I've been doing that for over 20 years. It's something that I'm passionate about and I truly love. And just looking forward to continually helping a lot of the first-time home buyers get educated and informed as possible.
Okay, just for clarity, the settlement came about because there was a group of sellers that was a little bit upset about, it seems like the industry was forcing them to pay not only the commission for selling their house, but also to the buyer's agent as well. I know in my practice for years, I've always given the seller option of, okay, this is commission range. If a buyer's agent is involved, we can reduce the commission. If one is involved, this is what we're accomplishing, and do a net sheet to show them what they'll walk away with.
Correct.
But too many in the industry wasn't giving full disclosure, and misleading some sellers would bring us to where we're at now.
Correct.
So with that in mind, it is going to change the dynamics, in my opinion, more so with the person that's purchasing the property. Because just like when interest rate changes or inventory gets tight, it's the consumer activity that really dictates what the market is going to do. So in your professional perspective, with history being the best lesson, once this comes to fruition, and we're now in a situation where it's mandatory to get buyers under a buyer's agent agreement, meaning that the buyer has to understand that if the seller is not paying a compensation, the buyer needs to pick up that fee if they want the buyer agent to work with them. And that can be anywhere from a flat fee to up to 2-3%, whatever that agent negotiates with the buyer. Correct. Now, I know if you're buying $1 million home, paying a buyer's agent fee, that may not be a burden for you. But in a typical first-time home buyer, how do you see that affecting the home buyers in the market if this comes to pass?
So, it's a great question. And I will say that a lot of, whether you're on as a real estate agent, if you're on the seller side or on the buyer side, I think that what we're seeing now, or going to see, is a lot clearer negotiations and collaborations on how we help those buyers at the end of the day. And so for the buyers themselves, when we're talking now about possibly having a flat fee or a commission-based fee to be able to pay that buyer's agent, I think a lot of buyers who are already somewhat marginalized as a first-time home buyer in what they have saved towards their down payment and closing costs, I think you're going to start to see some out-of-the-box thinking of how to really help those buyers hopefully have those funds to be able to pay the 2 or 3% commissions to the direct buyer agent, or even a flat fee. And so one of the things that I've always talked about is using down payment assistance as a resource. Now, the down payment assistance, I'm not saying in any way is going to pay for the 2% or the 3% or even that flat fee. But what I am saying is down payment and closing cost assistance programs are going to be there to offset typically a lot of the initial costs that a first-time home buyer has. So not only with their down payment and their closing costs to help them, but now it's reducing their out-of-pocket. Hence, hopefully with a little bit more money of their own funds that they have, they can now look at possibly paying a buyer's agent a flat fee or even a commission-based structure. So I think for a lot of the buyer's agents and the listing agents, seller's agents are really going to have to think outside the box on how they build those relationships and how they really help work with that consumer, that first-time home buyer that's really looking to purchase a home in this market come July, as they say. Yeah.
And I think one of the good things that's part of this settlement is the fact that it doesn't prevent the seller from compensating a buyer's agent.
Correct.
It just doesn't make it mandatory that they have to. And also, we cannot disclose the compensation in the
On
MLS,
the MLS
itself.
Correct. Multiple
So
listing
it is
service.
a possibility to still negotiate with the listing agent some type of compensation that it doesn't put a burden on the buyer, which at the end of the day, the buyer is the one that always typically pay for the closing costs and the commission anyway because it's rolled into their mortgage.
Correct.
It just affects the seller's bottom line. So let's say in the event that a buyer does want to go with a loan and contact the listing agent directly, what are some of the pitfalls, since they probably won't receive full representation because that listing agent legally has to represent the seller? So as a lender working with first-time home buyer, what kind of pitfalls you think that you can see that creating?
So the initial pitfall is going to be for the first-time home buyer, definitely savings, right? And how much they're really going to have towards a transaction now that those fees may be possibly passed on to them. So for the first-time home buyers out there, I would say the better you prepared for those types of negotiations, because at the end of the day, it's really going to be about negotiation and who's going to be paying for what. So I urge a lot of the buyers, vet your buyer's agent. Vet them by their experience, vet them by the value that they're going to be bringing. I heard not long ago that the market will shift now and you're going to have the hashtag value agent, right? And really understanding as a buyer's agent, what do you bring that buyer of way of education, information, of way of your negotiations? All of those are going to be really important. So for the buyers, I would say definitely your savings, the amount of money that you're going to have invested in the property, but also being able to vet that buyer's agent and the value that they're going to bring by way of communication, by way of negotiation, and all the other things that I mentioned before. Yeah.
And you mentioned vet. In your experience when working with first-time home buyers and real estate agent who had a buyer's agent, what kind of value did the buyer's agent bring to the transaction?
Great question. So I would definitely say communication and not being a part-time realtor. You know, we have a lot of real estate agents, over 3 million real estate agents nationwide. And so I would always say not all 3 million of those real estate agents are fantastic real estate agents, and not all of them are doing this work full-time. So I think that you're going to start to see a lot of real estate agents tap out of the market because they can't provide the service that a buyer may be looking for and have always been looking for, but even more so in this market. So when we're talking about the buyers, you really want to make sure that you're getting good communication, that you're not working with a part-time realtor that only wants to show you properties once every other week or so. You really want to have someone that's dedicated to the space, that understands all the aspects of financing, but also understands how to really negotiate your offers, because you're going to have a market where the offers are going to be competitive. It's somewhat of a buyer's market now, and it's shifting. But I always say when we're talking about lack of inventory, when we're talking about interest rates still being a little bit high for a lot of folks, historically, not bad, but still for a lot of individuals, I think it's going to be all about understanding what your lender is going to ask for, understanding the products that they have available to them that may offset some of those closing costs and down payment requirements of you, but really working with seasoned real estate agents and seasoned professionals, and realizing that everything is up for negotiations, even more so now.
I know we experienced in 2022, we start off that year with interest rate at 3% or lower. By the end of that year, we was up to almost 7%. That dynamic slowed down the market to a certain extent. Prior to that, it was lack of inventory. Do you think that misinformation or fear may cause more buyers to stay out of the market moving forward? And if so, how do you think that will affect the market?
So it's going to affect the market based on just misinformation, right? So, you know, you can go to Google, you can go to Zillow, you can go to all these wonderful websites, but it's really going to be about building the rapport with your team, from inspectors to your title company to your real estate agent and your lender, and many others that are involved in that home ownership process. You want to ask questions as that first-time home buyer. So providing getting as much knowledge in this space. You know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think it's a misinformation overload to a certain point. So all I would say is the person that you're bringing on your team, When was the last transaction that they closed? What type of transaction was that? Do they have a niche in their space? There's a lot of loan officers that only deal with FHA loans and don't have an appetite for conventional loan products. There's a lot of real estate agents that only deal with less listings, right? So I would say to that buyer, it's going to be about how you really, truly do your research on the professionals that you're working with. We're not saying in any way that you shouldn't be informed, going out to different sites, attending home buyer education classes, doing your own due diligence, but really doing the due diligence around the team that you're trying to work with, and ask as many questions as you can. And if you have an individual professional that says, oh, I don't know the answer for that, but they can at least point you in the right direction, that's a good thing, right? Not everyone's going to have all the answers, but the better that you are at seeking the right professionals and asking questions about what the transactions that they've done, their history, how long have they been doing that type of work, that's what's going to really drive the market. And I think it's always going to be about education and information, and we're going to see more of that over the next couple months.
Right. And I think you've been in the market as long as I have. Majority of my career, I've worked with first-time home buyers, representing the buyers, and I know as a buyer's agent, we're the ones that coordinate the inspections, coordinate the appraisal, if there's any repair issues, making sure the deadlines of the contracts are met. Because we know if a buyer missed a deadline, they could be in default and put the deposit at risk. In your career, the majority of the communication with the transaction, have you mainly talked to a buyer's agent or the seller's agent?
Mainly the buyer's agents. Okay. But in this business, of course, I always want to be very informed with the players or the stakeholders in the transaction. So I do a lot of conversations also with listing agents, because in the space and the niche market that I have with the down payment assistance programs, it's really important that the listing agents and sellers agents really understand how those programs work. So I've been fortunate enough to talk to both sides of the process, and that's where I think you're going to see, and probably have already seen, a lot of buyers now are so informed and being able to do better communication and want to understand, I want to have that open communication with that listing agent, that seller's agent. I want to have that open communication with the buyer's agent. There's many times when I'm doing a consultation and I'll say, hey, listen, let's get all parties on the line, right? So that we understand in that conference call who's doing what, making sure that we have open lines of communication all the way throughout the process. And I think that's what's going to be a big game changer. Those types of conference calls, those types of introductions and good introductions, and letting the buyer know that we've got your back. Right. We're here for you. And at any point in time, if you have any conversations or any questions that may come up, feel free to connect with your team in an email, in a conference call, and making sure that you get your answers to your questions.
Right. And I strongly feel that the market and the industry will figure a way forward. It doesn't prevent sellers from compensating buyer's agent by any means. All it does is add another layer of negotiation in the contract itself. Correct. So let's say that a buyer does negotiate a contract and the seller agreeing to pay closing costs up to 6%. Can any of those funds be somehow directed to help compensate for the buyer's agent, or there's limitations on what those funds could be used for if the seller say they will compensate the buyer a certain amount of money?
Well, to answer the question, I think it's still going to be up for negotiations, and there could be. I think you're going to see a lot of sellers agents really want to negotiate what that looks like, because at the end of the day, a lot of, not to say that the sellers agents don't do this, but a lot of the buyers agents are really working in pools where they attract a lot of buyers. Right. So it makes sense for a sellers agent to really connect with a buyer's agent to be able to understand that. Now, how they offer that compensation, remember we were saying that, yes, it no longer have to be on or will be on the MLS. However, those negotiations can still happen. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that in a negotiation, the buyer's agent couldn't be able to get a 2% or 3%, long as it's a written agreement between those parties. And it doesn't also mean that the buyer themselves can't have some sort of flat fee, as you mentioned, to help with negotiations of that sort. So I think the buyer's agents are still going to continually bring a lot of value in the market that they have and the access that they have to buyers, whether they're doing their own type of social media, whether they're doing home buyer education classes. They have a pool of buyers that have always been ready, and I think it's just going to be a matter of negotiation with the seller's agents.
Right. I've known as a buyer agent myself, I've always kept good communication with the lender prior to even showing buyers property to make sure I understand their ratios, what their payment's going to look like, and even to the point just prior to submitting an offer to run the numbers by the lender to say, okay, this is the purchase price, these are the taxes, the HOA, will this work for this buyer? And based on the lender's response, that lets me know if we can move forward, if we need to ask for closing costs. How do the dynamics change if it's just a listing agent that the buyer is dealing with and don't have those prerequisite questions to run by the lender first?
Great question. And I would say that it goes back to really understanding the value that the seller's agent is going to bring. So for a lot of the mortgage loan officers that are out there, I would say the communication with that seller's agent, making sure that they understand the type of financing that that buyer that they're working with is qualified for, and also the requirements. And so you're going to start to see, and it's happening already and has been, a lot of title companies, as an example, really working very, very closely in this particular change with their lenders, making sure that they've identified what the actual fees are really truly going to be, as opposed to those loan estimates that are initially out there. And we're not saying in any way that you don't want to have a loan estimate of your estimated down payments and your estimated closing costs, but I think even more so, you're going to see the open communication, direct communication with the seller's agents that have buyers, their title companies, and really understanding what those fees really look like. And I think you're also going to see where the title companies are going to help that first-time home buyer with giving some sort of credits to helping them purchase, but also lenders are going to start to look at giving individual buyers some more credits to be able to help them pay whatever those discretionary fees are between the seller's agent or the buyer's agent, for that matter. Not in any way saying that the lender's going to pay for that, but it really helps the buyer to offset those costs, to have a little bit more discretionary savings to pay those types of fees.
Right. And I feel to a certain extent, it will add a certain level of professionalism to the industry, because before, technically buyers were just customers of the buying agent. Now, once you have a written agreement, that person becomes your client. Now there's written expectation that you got to adhere to, and the client understands as well.
Correct.
So as a loan officer, how do you plan on prepping the buyers for the strong mandatory possibility of having to have a buyer's agent agreement with an agent before they even start showing them properties, and knowing that there's a fee associated with that possibly?
So I love that. And one of the things that I've always done in my consultations is not just have one. Right? So the initial consultation is just building the rapport with the client, really understanding who they're working with, who's possibly on their team. And if they don't have a team, how I can tap into the professionals that I've worked with, like yourself, to be able to say, hey, this is a good individual that you may want on your team. Of course, you're free to choose whoever you want. So with that, those are the consultations that need to happen. So in that first consultation, it's always going to be about building the rapport, making sure they understand, I understand as the loan officer, where they're at and where they want to go. Then the next consultation is going to be really about breaking down terms, understanding fees, understanding their requirements. And then we go move over to the actual qualification piece. But I always want to make sure that with these new buyer's agreements that may be in place, we're still waiting on, but I would say I want them to be as informed and making sure that they've read the benefits of having that buyer's agreement. And I love doing that. I'm going to love doing that with really the buyer's agent and making sure, hey, listen, let's get on a conference call. There's some questions that came up for me as a lender, as a loan officer, that I want to understand about the buyer's agreement that you have with this buyer. And especially if I'm referring that buyer to that buyer's agent, but also really solidifying that the buyer is comfortable with what they're signing and understanding the deadlines, as you mentioned, in that buyer's agreement, if they should default on it. I think you're also going to see, and it's already happened as well, a lot of buyer's agents creating buyer's agreements that lock in those buyers for a period of time, those buyer agreements. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to want a buyer's agent to waste time with a buyer that might jump to another buyer's agent or even a seller's agent to try and help them find a property. So I think you're going to see a detailed buyer's agreements going forward and what that looks like and the time frame for those buyer's agreements, but also really the compensation. So in the consultations, it's going to be important that we go over every aspect of those buyer's agreements. As a lender, I want to know, but definitely informing the buyer what they're getting into.
Yeah, I've also noticed a lot of headlines as clickbait, like the perception or misconception of this going to bring the prices down by 6%, or this going to create more inventory for the buyers, or it's given all these predictions as far as how it relates to the sales price themselves. And I know for a fact what drives any economy is demand. If you make the demand scarce, that in and of itself would bring down prices, and the perception would be is because commission came down, but it's more about making the buyers feel comfortable moving forward, because the market dictates the price, not the commission or anything like that, in my opinion. So what are some of the things that you would recommend buyers who's getting into this market, or saying, look, but they say price is going to come down on the summer, I'm going to wait till the summer, or interest rate going to come down, I'm going to wait till then. What advice would you give to buyers right now today?
So the catchphrase is date the rate, marry the house, right? Marry the mortgage, if you will. And, you know, rates on a historical basis, when we're talking about 6-7% right now in some cases, historically, those are still really great interest rates. I think we're coming off of a year or 2 years where we're at 2 or 3%, and everybody's expecting to get 2 or 3%, or waiting for the 2-3% to come back down. And that's just not going to happen anytime soon. And so what ends up happening is when the rates do start to come down, you're going to start to see prices of homes come up, right, and increase in value. So it's where you want to be in the market. Are you going to wait till the rates come down and then possibly be priced out of the market because now the values of the properties have increased? So I always say it's a great time to buy. If you're looking at high interest rates, you can always eventually refinance that interest rate and get yourself a better interest rate. There's ways with down payment assistance or even contributions from the lender to help buy down those interest rates as well. I think when we talk about this settlement, working with your seller's agents as well that can talk to the actual seller of the property about buying down the interest rate and giving the seller contributions to be able to do that. So you're going to continually see those types of negotiations happen, and I think that's where the market's going to go.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier about adding value as an agent. I know in my career as a real estate agent, when I'm sitting on the listing side, I've always gave the seller the option of what type of commission they want to pay. If there's no other agents involved, we had a sliding scale. And moving forward, I think one of the added values that I could bring a listing to the listing is my experience with working with buyers throughout my career. So therefore, I can still manage that contract from start to finish. Because I've sitting across from listing agents that I don't work with buyers. And I know with the deadlines that's associated with contracts, that can create another layer of complication if the appraisal come in short, if the repair issues, or let's say they miss an inspection date, then they get inspections done and find out the roof is shot or something of that nature, but now they locked into the contract. What kind of advice would you give buyers moving forward as far as working with the listing agent and no buyer agent, or should they find a way to still work with a buyer's agent regardless of if it may cost them a little bit more?
So I'm just a firm believer that you definitely want someone on your side of the transaction and on your team. And not to say anything against sellers agents and listing agents, but they're really there on the behalf of the seller and the listing property. So working with a buyer's agent for first-time home buyers, I think you're definitely going to want to vet, as I mentioned before, your buyer's agent, but working with someone that understands your best interest and what you're really going to want in looking for the property, but also in the negotiations. So when there's an issue that comes up with a roof or plumbing or what have you, and you're doing your inspections, that when that inspection report comes back, that you have a buyer's agent that's really going to talk and negotiate on your behalf to have those things either paid by the seller or resolved prior to your closing, so that as a first-time home buyer, once you close on that property, you're not having to worry about those huge expenses when it comes to fixing plumbing or fixing a roof. And so the more informed that you are with the value that that buyer's agent brings, that's where it's going to be a real game changer in how you negotiate with the sellers going forward. Right.
And I didn't mean to turn this into a math quiz or anything like that. Just using round generic numbers. But if the median sales price in Miami-Dade is $550, if the buyer doesn't have any assistance, no down payment assistance, if everything need to come from them out of pocket, and add a buyer's agent fee on top of that, what type of numbers are the buyers looking at in purchasing a property?
So at the bare minimum, you're looking at 3% down payment on a conventional loan, as an example. And then on FHA, Federal Housing Administration, you're looking at about 3.5% just for your down payment. And then estimate anywhere between 4.5% to 5% on closing costs. So, you know, that for some buyers is $30,000, sometimes $50,000, depending upon the sales price of the property. So coming out of just your down payment and your closing costs, now we're adding the buyer's agent's commission or flat fee. That can really put a damper on the home ownership process for that first-time home buyer. So it's going to be about working with buyer's agents that may want to negotiate that fee and bring down that fee, and realizing the value that you as a buyer bring to helping them with their transactions, but also talking to your lender, talking to all the parties involved. It's going to be a lot of open transparency with fees, but open transparency with negotiations. You're going to see, I think, by the teams that you create, from the title company, from your inspector, everyone is going to try and help that buyer by lowering their fees to be able to get them into the transaction. And we know that that goes a long way down the line, whether it is on our social media, whether it is on the next referral that we get, or how we really tell the story. So all of those pieces to the transaction, I think, are going to start to help that first-time home buyer going forward.
Okay, great information. One thing I know for sure is it's going to create more responsibility on a buyer's agent to prove their worth.
Yes. Because
the stronger that buyer agent is, I feel the easier it is for them to negotiate the fee to offset what the buyer may have to come out of pocket with. So it's going to cause people to be more professional in this field, and which is a great thing, because now the buyer will have the confidence that this person is really looking out for their best interest, as opposed to submitting a contract and just collecting the check.
Correct.
So the accountability is very important, and I'm glad we have professionals like you that have worked with buyers to make them understand the importance of having that representation. Before it was said that, oh, working with a buyer's agent is free, you don't have to.
Right.
The buyer has always paid for that. Most of the time it would just roll into the mortgage. And it may be that way now. There's nothing preventing real estate professionals from, on their private website, to say, we will co-broker, or even calling the agents beforehand, before they show the property, like, I got a buyer, they don't have the funds to pay a buyer's agent fee. Is the seller willing to compensate if the offer is strong? So there's still ways to get deals done that doesn't put additional burden on the buyer. But again, it's going to come down to the industry and the buyer's agent to show they prove their worth. And again, it's going to turn us working with buyers as customers to clients, because now we're accountable to them. So I know there's a lot of moving part. This thing is still liquid and fluid, and it's going to be new revelation as we move forward. But the good news is that there are professionals in the field, such as yourself and myself, that have the buyers in mind, knowing that They're the
Correct.
engine of this economy.
Yes.
If they sit on the sidelines, it comes to a halt.
Correct.
So I'm confident that we'll find a way as an industry to make sure everyone has a happy medium, discloses up front, so that way everyone is happy.
Yep.
And again, I appreciate your time that you came today.
worries.
Anything you want to say in closing? So
thank you again for having me on. I will say this, that the better that we as professionals are educating buyers and sellers, for that matter, about these new changes and how that home ownership process really works, the easier the transactions will be.
Right.
And so I think the heart of the transactions are coming from individuals, both on the professional side, on the housing professional side, but also on the buyers or sellers, by not being as informed. I'll just leave you with this. When I heard the verdict come out, I was actually, or the settlement come out, I should say, I was actually on vacation, and someone called me and said, hey, listen, so what's your opinion on this whole settlement with the National Association of Realtors? And I said, listen, I'm going to take my dog for a walk on the beach right now because I'm not worried about it.
Right.
Because what I've read and what I understood is it's just time to adapt. There's been possible changes coming, and the better that you are ahead of what those changes are, and don't be complacent, and understanding that when those changes do possibly come, that you are already working with the right professionals, you already understand how you're going to help your buyers get them into a home, and staying informed and educated as much as possible. So I'm not worried about what's to come. I think that we're going to continue to work in the great circle of being professionals in this space, but also making sure that we're helping the buyers and the sellers on the transaction.
Yeah, and I still strongly believe in, like, historically, 20% of the agents and loan officers are doing 80% of the business. So the ones that are shaking out the business, that's the 80% anyway. And the top 20 that really have a passion for helping people will still be there. So, I'm encouraged and excited about the possibility, because it will create new avenues to be more professional and consolidate some of the business out there. So I've always tell my clients, especially the first-time home buyer, I said, home ownership is not a destination.
Correct.
It's a process, and that process continues. So I advise buyers to continue going to get the education, sitting in the classes, because what that does is create an environment where you feel comfortable asking questions to the professionals who will be working for you in this process. So again, stay focused in this space. We're going to be bringing more information in the future from the seller side, and the industry will figure a way out. And the buyers are still in control. The key thing is surround yourself with professionals that have you as the priority to negotiate on your behalf. And that's in a nutshell. And one more thing.
No, good.
All right, so we appreciate your time. Pay attention to this space, because there will be more information forthcoming. I appreciate you, and have a great day.
Take care.